The Legend of Korra, the sequel to the Avatar The Last Airbender series. This is one that I thought about covering right after the Avatar Netflix thing came out. And I really did not like the adaptation they did of Avatar. And I guess we'll see what happens with the next seasons they do. I don't have much hope. But I thought about it like, okay, I actually did like The Legend of Korra more than I liked that Netflix thing that they did. So I figured, okay, I've seen The Legend of Korra a few times. It's been a while, though, since I've seen it. So I decided I'm going to go ahead and start rewatching it now and actually do some reviews. So the Avatar The Last Airbender series, the original series, is obviously like the top thing. It is like it is the perfect thing that we have within the Avatar franchise. You can go back to it, just love it all. I think it's great. But the Legend of Korra series has definitely been a controversial one to this day. There's been multiple plot points and characters and whatnot, what they do in this show, that has been controversial. There's also been things that people really like. And when I initially watched it, I liked quite a bit of the show, but there are some big issues with the show overall. Now in this one, I'm going to be going over book one. I'm going to go over all the seasons through different videos. I'm going to be reviewing each one and just kind of talking about the things I liked about it, the things that I really just didn't like, and some of the issues that immediately arise, and just the overall feeling of the show compared to, let's say, Avatar, and where it's linking up and how it affects, the overall Avatar story. Now, this show is obviously not new. It finished up like 10 years ago at this point. So it's been a little while. We're going to be getting a new movie and stuff like in a year or two. So let's go ahead and review The Legend of Korra Book 1. Let's cover all of its issues and all of its positives. I still think possibly one of the most exciting moments of this show is the immediate opening to the series premiere of the show. It's when you get the big mural image shot of all of our Avatar characters in this one big shot, while Tenzin, the new character, Aang's son, narrates and tells you about the 100-Year War and how Aang and Zuko stopped it, which I think is incredible. You love to see the immediate acknowledgement of these characters and what they did and the story that happened before, and it's leading you right into what's going to be happening now. Where is this next story going, and where are we going to see certain characters? What happened? What is the world at now? And they introduce Republic City in this same intro. And then we also do get to see an actual statue of Avatar Aang on his now little island there near Republic City, and that is kind of a big focal point, especially in book one. We do see quite a bit of it, and it's just cool to see the legacy characters kind of represented immediately. Like, okay, this is the world that but now we're jumping into this whole new story. It's a new Avatar. What's going to happen? And I love that Tenzin narrates the intro because it's Aang's son. It's like the next generation now of these characters. And I think it's cool. I think it's definitely cool. And they do all the air, water, fire, earth stuff too. I like that they stick with that. And the intro, I wish they would have done something longer for the overall intro of the show, because after the first premiere episode, they cut it down to like Tenzin saying like only the Avatar can save the world or something like that, and that's it. That's all they really cut it down to. So it's really short after this, but this first premiere intro, talking about a lot. I know it's just an intro, but I love it. I think it's fantastic, and it brings you right into, this is what you knew. This is the world again. Remember these characters. Remember what happened. Here's what's next. Now, the actual opening scene of the actual series here with Korra is, I think, still like a controversial thing. For some people I've seen online mention that this is like an issue that's like, it's a little strange when you compare it to Aang, because now when you have Korra, you're going to be comparing her to Aang, which is maybe unfair to the character, because obviously the only Avatar we've known is Aang, but it is what it is. And when you're comparing her to Aang and her beginning here, it's like, well, this is very weirdly different. When we first see Korra, she's much younger, and it's the White Lotus trying to find the next Avatar. Who is the next Avatar? And Korra's in her room there, or the house with her parents, and she is just bending all the other elements except air like pretty well. Like, obviously it's not mastered or anything, but she's just throwing water around, fire, earth. And it's just strange because when you watch Aang in, the main series, the original series, he's struggling to learn all the other elements, and he can hardly do a flame at certain points in the show. And I guess you can compare that fire thing with Korra with air. But her just throwing elements around immediately is definitely a little different than what they did with Aang. I don't really have much of an issue with it because they kind of lead into the story of her struggling, like learning air mostly. So she's still struggling to learn an element. So we still get to see that development in the first season, but it is a little weird. So as I was saying with the intro, right at the beginning of the show, this show does a lot of like caring and respect for the legacy original characters of the show. At least in book one, for sure. You got lots of little references and statues and whatnot of characters. You get to see Katara actually still around and helping Korra. So it's cool to see these characters still shown as important as they were. And I like that. They're not just like being tossed around and, shat on left and right like some, like, say, Star Wars, for example. It's something that they're represented in a great way. They built Republic City in this wonderful way. They ended the 100-Year War, and they're respected. Aang is respected, Zuko's respected, Katara is, and I just think it's a great thing. Now, there's lots to get into with this show, but I will be jumping around just a little bit on my biggest points here that I really want to cover with Season 1. And my biggest and most favorite thing of this season, and this is why I label it as my favorite season, I absolutely love the character of Amon. Amon is probably my favorite villain in the entire Avatar universe, like throughout all the shows and whatnot. He is my favorite. And I don't know if it's because maybe he's the best villain necessarily. I think the greatest villain was the Fire Lord, but he is my favorite personal villain. I just love the presence of Amon. I love masked characters like this. When he's talking, you don't get to see his facial expressions. He's very dark and cold and mysterious. You don't know who the hell he is. And I just absolutely love that. And you don't know how the hell he's doing this crazy thing where he's able to take people's bending away like Aang did at the end of the original series. It's like, well, that was a crazy powerful thing that Aang did. How is this guy doing it? So I absolutely love the character of Amon, and I do actually like the character, not just his presence, but the character itself. The backstories they went into with him and his brother, and that final scene with him. And I do wish Amon was stuck around a little longer in the show. The fact that this show, I think, I could be wrong, definitely correct me if I'm wrong, I think this show was really planned to really just be one big story there with one season. He was going to tell Korra's story and have her learn air and have her defeat this villain, and then that would be it for her story. It kind of wrapped up nicely like that. So at the end of the season, it makes sense that they kill Amon and they move on and it ends, But I do wish Amon would have been a bigger character. But at the end of the season, obviously they reveal that he's faking his scar on his face. He's not really, he was never really attacked by benders, but he still has his hatred for benders, even though he himself is a waterbender and he can bloodbend, and that's how he's been taking people's bending away. And I think that is incredibly fascinating, and that whole backstory with him and his brother as well, I think it was just very, very cool. And I just love the presence of the character of Amon, and I do wish we would have seen more of him. I do love the scenes that we do get with him in this season, but he is definitely my personal favorite villain in the shows, of all the shows. I just really like this character, and it's probably why the first season of The Legend of Korra is definitely my favorite amongst all of them. There are still some good villains in The Legend of Korra, like Zahir in season 3, but I just really, really like the character of Amon. Another really big standout character of book 1 and really the rest of the show, but book 1, it's Tenzin, Aang's son, the only other airbender of Aang's children, and he is, raising his family of airbenders, basically, and he is starting up the air nomads and whatnot again, and he is the teacher for Korra to learn air, and he is pivotal for her learning the element of air, and his story in book 1, and I know in the later ones too, is quite important. It's just cool to see him kind of representative of Aang and what he represented and who he was, and continuing on that legacy, and him just being such a kind of like a mentor to Korra through this show. And he was like that in this season as well, and I do really, really like Tenzin. And I think overall, I think Tenzin is probably my favorite hero character of this whole show and in book 1, but of this show in general. He is a great character. Just book one alone, he does some incredible things. We get to see some incredible moments with him and his family and with Korra. And I really love that we have this pivotal like character here really linked with Aang, who is now helping Korra along the way. Another character that was actually done pretty well is Lin Beifong, who is now Toph's daughter. So we're getting all these children of our legacy characters in these shows. She's the chief of police, and she's kind of a cold character. She's kind of cold, she's kind of tough, and it makes sense for her to be Toph's daughter. You know, you can see it. You can see that this is Toph's kid, and she's tough. She's a metal bender. She's the chief of police, which we saw kind of get built up a little bit in the comics, which I decided to end up reading before I watched the Korra series, or rewatched Korra. So obviously Republic City got built up in the comics a bit, so now we get to see the flourishing city with the police force that Toph kind of started, and now her daughter is kind of running the thing. So I think that's cool. The character is obviously another great one in this. There's lots of great characters. There's some ones that are just kind of like, whatever, I'll get to it throughout the show, but I think Lin is definitely more of a standout one. Her, and even in book one, is great. You know, you get the interactions with Tenzin, her helping Korra try and stop Amon and all that stuff, her, you know, sacrificing herself to save Tenzin's family and losing her bending for it. You know, I think all that stuff was pretty cool. And it's a good character addition for the show for sure. And it's just kind of like that legacy character in there from Toph's side of the Avatar universe. Now, two characters that are very, very big and major characters of the show in general, and in book one we learn, is Mako and Bolin. We get to see them with the fire ferrets and doing all the different, you know, training and stuff. And the tournaments and the bending tournaments is kind of like representative of Toph in the Avatar series, where she was doing the underground hidden bending tournaments, but now they're doing like a full-blown, like, this is citywide, it's known, it's an official sport now, and we get to see them doing that, and that's how Korra runs into them. And I do like Bolin and Mako. I have nothing really against the characters. The issue is, at least in book one, maybe I'll feel differently about them as I relearn and, you know, re-understand the series as I rewatch it here. I'll see the little moments, but at least in book one, they're just kind of like, they're okay. You know, Bolin is kind of like the off-brand Sokka. He's kind of just there to make some quippy jokes and stuff. Mako's more the stubborn, cold type of one who has this, like, love triangle thing with Korra and Asami and that shit. I really don't like that stuff. But, you know, they do that with Mako. Bolin, they do a little bit of that with him as well. The characters are just kind of there. They're just like her friends. They're just Korra's friends that she meets along the way. We do learn a little bit of Bolin and Mako in the show. I don't really have any specific reasons as to why. They're just kind of like average to me. I just don't feel like they're as strong of characters as some of the other major characters in this show. I would say even Korra herself, which I do have issues with. I think she is obviously much more of an interesting character than Bolin or Mako. I think Mako and Bolin are just kind of there. And again, Bolin is just the off-brand Sokka. So in season one, they're okay. They're there as the new team Avatar, and they're there to help Korra, basically. It's to build up this new team for Korra. They're kind of trying to replicate this whole, she has a bunch of friends, and she's going to go save the day against these new threats. Another major thing in The Legend of Korra, Book 1, we get to see Republic City for the first time. Republic City, the thing that was built up by Zuko and Aang, and it was kind of done a little bit into the comics. I think the comics were after the show actually finished, but in the comics they did go ahead and start to develop that story along as well. But this is a city that Aang and Zuko built up, where benders, non-benders, whoever can come together and live together and have this flourishing society. And I think it is a really cool concept, and I do like to see the advancement in technology where we're starting to get things like vehicles and cars and motorcycles and planes and these airships, and it's all advancing much more than we ever saw in Avatar The Last Airbender. I do think it is interesting, but it also can be a setback if you really love the vibe of Avatar. You know, if you really love the vibe of Avatar and the limited technology in the world they were in then, I think if you jump into this, it's definitely different. It's very, very different. Lots of episodes and seasons in the city, lots of different scenery. You know, it's different. They're fighting around buildings and whatnot. It's just different. And I think it's good. I think it definitely is good. Now, I could see an issue where in the future, if they do like the ongoing story of like another Avatar, where, you know, if they're continuing to advance in the technology, how much further do you really want to see? Do you really want to see the Avatar story get really, really modern? Almost to the point where we're at. Do you really want to see that? I don't know. But right now, I think it's okay still. It still works for me. They're still like learning technologies, and but by the point, if you go to another series with this where it's like the advanced modern technology in the Avatar world, how would that work? I don't know. That's for another day whenever they possibly do that story, but for this show it definitely is a different turn from the world that we saw in The Last Airbender. But let's get to Korra. Korra, this is her show, The Legend of Korra. One issue I do have with this show is that Korra is not the standout character for me, and I think perhaps she should be, or at least one of the biggest standout characters for me. Obviously, like the most focus is really around Korra. It's her story. She's the Avatar. I think the biggest issue with the show, one of the biggest issues for the show, is actually the character of Korra. I really love a lot of the things in the current world of the Legend of Korra, but the character herself is off-putting, at least at the beginning. It could be for some people. Now, I understand what they're doing, where she's very tempered and she's impulsive and cocky with her powers and her bending. She's really, really cocky with all of her different bending except air, and she gets really, really frustrated when she cannot learn air, and she's very different from Aang. And I think that was what their intention was. She's going to be very different from Aang, a very, very different avatar from Aang, and she's going to learn in different ways. And I get that. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. It's just, for me personally, it does get really frustrating at some points. It does. I think that's the point of it, though. So I'm not going to really go at them too hard for that. But in this season, it is frustrating at some points to watch that happen. That was done for a reason. I do understand that. I don't think that was really a badly written choice for her character. They're definitely trying to distinguish her from Aang. So it definitely can be jarring from watching this Avatar kid who learned all the elements and became this freaking god, basically, and defeated the Fire Lord and figured everything out and saved everything, to this new Avatar who is just kind of fumbling around, doing whatever, messing around with people with her powers, being all cocky about it. And so it can be off-putting. So that is definitely, I feel like, a choice to make her look very different from Aang. I think all Avatar The Last Airbender fans probably love the flashback scenes in this season, where we get the flashbacks to Yakon's trial, the bloodbender who was the father of Amon and Tarlok. So the trial flashbacks is the trial that put him on trial, and for using bloodbending and whatnot, trying to take over the city and all that. And we get to see a older Aang, a older Toph, older Sokka, who is dead at this point in the actual main story of Legend of Korra. He is gone, he is dead, but he is alive in these flashbacks, much older than they were in the actual original series. So it is nice to actually get a scene or two with Sokka, because he's not around anymore. He died between series, and that's kind of what they're doing. Now, there are some characters that are still kind of unknown, even at the end of the show in general, not just explained or ignored in book one. But Suki's not around really at all. You got Azula out there somewhere who was not in the series as well, not explained or shown or told that she died or anyone. So we don't know what happened to a few characters. But yeah, it was cool to see these characters again, and I think it's kind of a good thing to show them again, because you're trying to link everything and you're trying to tie it to the current story. And that's what they did with this whole flashback with Yakone, where they're putting him on trial, and this man who can bloodbend without the full moon, how is he able to do this? And it links to the story in the future with Amon and Tarlok. So I think it all works out pretty well. So, speaking of Amon and Tarlok, or Noatak and Tarlok, the flashback between these two brothers, which is later in the show, later in the season, when they start to reveal who Amon really is. Again, I just really love the character of Amon and what they did with him, and the concept of bloodbending. Now, they didn't really explain it too well, the concept of bloodbending, without the full moon and all that stuff. So I don't know if they'll one day tell us really how they're able to do it. They just kind of told us that they trained really hard and they were able to do it, and they learned the power by excessive training with water bending, with blood bending. So obviously Yakone is their father, and he trained these two kids to use bloodbending, and he was able to do bloodbending without the full moon as well. So this is family of three here with, they have their mother as well, but this family of, that are able to bloodbend without the full moon. They could do it whenever they want. And you get to see this dark turn of Amon here, and you get the story of kind of making Tarlok look a little more sympathetic near the end as well, who was kind of an ass to, a lot of the show. He's trying to get, Korra on the task force, and then he eventually turned on her, captured her, all that crap. At the end, they kind of made him sympathetic in a little bit of way. He was kind of like a twisted man from his own father, same as Amon. But I do really like that flashback sequence with Amon and his brother. All that stuff I think was really cool, and it's good to explore that. And it kind of made sense. It added to the weight of the final scene when Tarlok does kill Amon on the boat, when they both blow up on the boat and Tarlok takes them both out. Another big issue I have with season 1 is it is more like the first half, really, but it's all of the tournament bending stuff, the fire ferret stuff, all that stuff. There was a whole episode in this show in the first season that is kind of dedicated to the tournament fire ferret stuff and the relationship love triangle drama crap in one episode. It's like all combined in the one episode, and that's really all that it is. And that is probably the worst episode of the season, if I had to say that now. I don't like either of those things. There's just too much time taken up on the tournament stuff, and I do wish they would have done a little less of it. Now, I did like where it ended up leading to Amon coming down and, taking control of the arena and blowing it up. I loved all that stuff. I think that was cool. But I felt like there was a little bit too much of it, and it kind of got old. I wanted to get to the story itself, and you could argue this is part of the story. I get it, but I just would have wished to see a little bit less of it. And when I say that, I also want to see a lot less of the love triangle, teen relationship stuff. Look, I know it's a very popular thing with a lot of people. A lot of people love to watch that type of stuff. I cannot stand it. It's specifically with teenage characters because they make them act like teenagers, and you're watching them with all this love triangle drama stuff. I legitimately cannot stand it. This show is lucky that it has a lot of good elements and story elements to keep me interested enough, but holy crap, it can get really, really overbearing and annoying. And obviously the whole love triangle thing with Mako and Korra and Asami, it's all kind of pointless at the end when they end up going ahead and just doing whatever the hell they wanted near the end of the series. So when you go back and watch it again and you start to see it all again, it's like, well, what was the point of all this anyways? It feels even more pointless than ever now. So it gets really, really tiring, just jumping in every now and then. You're trying to watch what Korra's going to do next, or, how Mako and Bolin are going to get in out of this situation and all that stuff. How are they going to defeat them on? And then they're bitching and arguing about, who kissed who. Like, I really don't care. And I just want to get to the main story. I think it's over exaggerated too because they're teenagers. And that's just what they do with teenager characters. Now, one more big story element that I do want to touch on from season 1, book 1 air, is the story with Hiroshi, which is Asami's father. He is like the CEO of Future Industries or something like that. He's the one who was basically providing all the materials and technology for the Equalists with Amon. He was working with Amon. And at the end, we get to learn that he's working with Amon, and he turns on Korra and his own daughter. And, he works with Amon near the end there, and then they have a big fight. Asami and him have a big fight, and then he gets taken to prison. And I think we do see him again later in the show. But in this season specifically, I think it's a good storyline, and I think it's good for Asami's character to propel her character even further in the show. I think it really does that well. I don't know. I didn't find myself all too attached with the whole situation in general. I think it worked well. I think what they were doing made sense and all that stuff. I do think it's fine. It works really well with the story. It makes the story kind of make sense on how Amon has so much power and technology. I do get it. So here is probably my biggest reason, or one of my biggest reasons, why book 1 of The Legend of Korra is it's a perfect, nice story that I think is the best season. Because you can watch this season. You can literally watch the first season of The Legend of Korra after you watch, Avatar and all that stuff. You can watch it and it ends, and then you don't have to watch anymore. Now, obviously, going forward, they do a lot more different things, lots more world building. But if you want to, if you really want to, if you don't want to go forward and watch them start to mess around with the storyline and the plot and the Avatar state and all that stuff, you could just end at book 1 and you got a good ending. This season ends because I believe they were ending it at season 1, but then they picked it up for more seasons. But I think it was it seemingly was meant to just end at one season. It was one story and go. You know, they got Korra losing her bending from Amon, and then she learns airbending. So she's only an airbender until the final scene where Aang finally shows up and says, "You are finally connected with your spiritual side at your lowest point." And he finally talks to her. It's not just like a flashback that she's seeing of young Aang, or, you know, adult younger Aang who's still alive. It's actually him talking to her now within the Avatar state, and all the past lives are now there connecting to her. And we get to see with him restoring all of her bending. Now she's going to have mastered, or known now, how to use all 4 elements. She is a full Avatar now. She knows all the elements. Aang, she's connected with Aang and all the past lives. You know, she has discovered the Avatar state. She enters the Avatar state, I think, for the first time at the end there. And it's all a perfect conclusion to the story of Korra. If they didn't go and do more seasons, it would have been the perfect ending, and I think it is the better ending. I think it is a better ending. There's still a lot of cool stuff later on, but I think if it would have ended at season 1 right here, I think it would have been very, very good. You got the final scene with her and Mako, which, you know, gets all wrecked within the later seasons anyways. So, I mean, you know, if you really want to look at it that way, if you really liked this, you know, you're going to get it all ruined later in the other seasons. So, I mean, I think it's whatever. I think it's fine. I don't really care. Again, as I mentioned, all the love triangle stuff, it was all flip-floppy up until this point anyways. So it's like, it is what it is. But they do mess around with it even more later, and it gets annoying. It does get annoying. But they did do this. You know, they wrapped up their story. They're together at the end. And then Korra can now restore people's bending. So as she's connected with all of her past lives again, we get to see all the other avatars again. And she's able to restore people's bending. She restores Lin Beifong's bending after Amon took it. And I'm sure she restores some other people's bendings as well. She's able to do that now with Aang's help and her connection to the Avatar state, the Avatar spirit. And I think it is just a very good end to the story in general. Not just the season, to the story. Now, obviously, it went on to do 3 more seasons, and they get into a lot more different crazy things. Either way, it is a good ending as a season, as well as they do pick up and do more later. But as a season, I think it is the most concise, fits real well with the Avatar world and story. It has a beginning and it has an end. There's no like weird cliffhangers. It is a nice solid story. It's got an incredible villain. It respects all of the original characters in the lore in certain ways, and I think it's awesome. I think it really is. You get to see some of, you know, the legacy characters' children. You get to see Lin. You get to see Tenzin. You get to see this new Avatar find her way and learn all the elements and finally learn air at the end, which is kind of like the opposite with Aang, because he was, you know, the last airbender. He only knew air. So it's kind of like a flip-flop there. It's a cool story. I do really love how it ended. And I think that's just why it's my favorite season. It just all feels right. You know, it feels all right. There's issues. Nothing's perfect, but I think it just has that good ending. Got enough good villains, got enough good new characters that continue the legacy of, you know, the Avatar and whatnot. And I think it's just a really good season. Now, getting into season 2, season 3, 4, they get into some really crazy stuff with the spirits and Zahir. And then they get into like the Earth Kingdom stuff. They get into a lot of different things. Book 1 is the season that feels like it fits the Avatar show, the original series. It fits with that one the best. I think it really does. If you watch that, you cut it off, and it's just a good addition to the franchise. Getting into the later seasons, as we will, there are definitely more issues that arise. You know, they cut off the Avatar state as well, her connection with the past avatars. That is another issue for another review. But for book 1, great villain, great new characters, great story. I liked it. Good start, good ending. And I'm curious to see how I'll feel going into book 2, 3, and 4. Because I haven't watched them in a good several years now. And I'm curious to see how I'll feel after rewatching Avatar, reading the comics for the first time. I'm curious to see how I'll feel going into those.